It's time for the Edge Radio broadcast with your host, Daniel Lott.
For example, the HIV tests, first of all, they're not a test for AIDS, which many people believe. Secondly, they're not even a test for HIV, even though they're called that. They're a test for HIV antibodies, and in every other case of having the antibodies to a virus, it means that we're immune from the disease that virus could cause. I mean, that's the entire basis of vaccinations. And, you get a smallpox vaccination, you get a measles vaccine or a flu shot, it's supposed to allow your body to develop antibodies to those diseases so that you don't get the serious disease in the future. But all of a sudden, on August 14th, 1987, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention decided that having the antibodies to HIV meant that you were going to get a deadly disease called AIDS. Now, this is the first time it's happened in scientific and medical history. They did not back that claim up with any scientific references at all, but now we've believed it for 20 years, so, people think if they're HIV positive, they're going to get AIDS, and they're most likely going to die. It is simply not true. As a matter of fact, having HIV or testing HIV positive is no more dangerous than having green eyes and brown hair, according to all the scientific studies. Again, I don't want anybody to believe anything I'm saying. There's a website called helpforhiv.com, helpforhiv.com, and on that, anybody can read all the scientific studies to show that these HIV tests are totally bogus. They're wrong most of the time. They have false positive cross reactions 90% of the time. They have never been validated. The list goes on. It's a crime what we're doing by telling people they're HIV positive based on these tests and putting them through intense emotional and psychological trauma and family stress and social rejection and financial hardship. This has got to stop at some point.
Well, who would you think is behind this in general? I mean, is it the medical community? Is it the government? What's going on here?
Well, Daniel, a lot of people suggest that maybe HIV was created for some mysterious or conspiratorial purpose. I don't see any evidence of that, but I'll tell you what happened. AIDS first showed up in 1981 in the gay community, and for the first 3 years, we all believed it was caused by a drug called amyl nitrite. It's known as poppers, and there was a widespread use of poppers in the gay community, and amyl nitrite is known to destroy a human immune system, and at the same time, it can turn many classes of antibiotics into carcinogens. And there was a widespread use of antibiotics as well in the gay community. But then along came Dr. Robert Gallo on April 23rd, 1984, and he announced that HIV was now the cause of AIDS. What was going on at that time is equivalent to the perfect storm. We had the gay community who did not want AIDS to be a result of their own lifestyle, and they knew that funding would never be available if it was strictly a gay disease. You had scientists and researchers at the National Institutes of Health and the Centers for Disease Control who were failing at the war on cancer that had been going on for 10 years. They needed a new disease. Basically, there were a lot of factors that came into play so that when Robert Gallo stood up and said HIV causes AIDS, everybody jumped on the bandwagon. And unfortunately, there was no scientific evidence then or now that HIV causes AIDS. In fact, HIV fails every single medical and scientific test to be called the cause of AIDS, and yet we still believe it today.
So the end result is, what is the cause of AIDS? Just bottom line.
Well, I can't give that to you because there are really 4 different kinds of AIDS, and each one has a different cause. There is the classic AIDS that showed up in the gay community in the early 1980s, and that, as I said, was more than often caused by the drug amyl nitrite or poppers. Mm-hmm. You then had AIDS by doctor's prescription. In other words, in 1987, the drug AZT was approved by the FDA, but it was only approved to be given to very, very sick AIDS patients. Well, they didn't stop there. They very quickly started giving it to people who were diagnosed HIV positive, but were not sick at all. They called it prevention. But unfortunately, AZT caused immune deficiency. In other words, it caused AIDS, and 95% of all AIDS cases up through 1997, when AZT was finally taken off the market as a single-dose monotherapy, AZT caused 95% of those AIDS cases. You then have AIDS by definition, and that means that the Centers for Disease Control have very often changed the definition of AIDS. AIDS was originally, it stands, of course, for acquired immune deficiency syndrome. So it was a collection of diseases, opportunistic diseases, that people would get when their immune systems collapsed. But all of a sudden, the CDC starts adding more and more diseases, and in 1993, they added cervical cancer to the list of AIDS diseases. So if a woman is HIV positive and has cervical cancer, now she has AIDS instead. And they only did this for one reason. One of the tests that HIV fails to be called the cause of AIDS is that a virus like HIV cannot differentiate between men and women. In other words, it has to attack both genders equally. But 90% of all AIDS cases up until 1993 were men. And this was very embarrassing to the CDC. So they added cervical cancer to the list of AIDS so that more women would be included in the disease. Mm-hmm. And it worked a little bit. There's now only 83% men and 17% women. So there's the third kind of AIDS, AIDS by definition.
Yeah.
The last kind of AIDS is AIDS in Africa, which is a totally different ball of wax. You do not have to be HIV positive to be diagnosed with AIDS in Africa. All you have to have is chronic diarrhea, chronic fever, chronic cough, and a body loss, weight loss of more than 10% of your body. Well, Daniel, that's the symptoms of poverty and malnutrition as well.
Right.
So you have four different kinds of AIDS, each with their own cause.
So really, it's a political football for people, governments, and health organizations to get more funding.
Well, it's become a multi-billion-dollar business worldwide. I mean, in 2006 alone, it was $19 billion budget in the Department of Health and Human Services for AIDS research. Now, just to put this in perspective, we're losing about 15,000 people a year to AIDS. Half of those are admittedly dying because of the side effects of the AIDS drugs, but that's another topic. 15,000 deaths a year. Well, we lose 500,000 people to cancers of all kinds, and we lose 700,000 people to heart disease of all kinds. But the budget for AIDS research and treatment and prevention is hundreds of times bigger than the budgets for heart disease and cancer. So this has become a cash cow. There's a lot of people making a lot of money, not just the pharmaceutical companies, which are making billions and billions of dollars, but also researchers, scientists, organizations. It's become one of the biggest businesses in the world.
Yeah. What about this? Wasn't there some countries that were trying to seize the medications, to copy them? They wanted to copy them and make them available to their own country. Who was doing that?
Well, there are countries in Africa. In South Africa, for example, the president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, he refused to allow AZT and the other antiretroviral drugs into his country for years because he did his own research and he found out, first of all, how dangerous they were, and he also did not believe HIV was the cause of AIDS in his country. There are other countries, like the president of Uganda announced last week that he thought he had found the cure for AIDS, and I'm not even sure what it is, but he said he's been curing people in his country with it. And there's a big fight over sending these very lethal antiretroviral drugs to Africa. I mean, Bill Gates is in on it now.
Oh, boy.
And Sprint is in on it now. And, the latest scientific study published on August 5th, 2006, proved that these drugs that are being given to HIV positives these days to treat AIDS are worse than the ones given 10 years ago. And starting in 2002, at the International AIDS Conference in Barcelona, Spain, even the AIDS establishment began to admit that more than half of the AIDS deaths are due to the side effects of these drugs from organ failure, mainly liver failure. So this whole antiretroviral drug scene has also gotten out of hand and is killing more people than AIDS and HIV.
Mm-hmm. What about this? I always had this question. I never have got an answer for it, Stephen Davis. Whenever they started rolling out the AIDS infomercials, I can't remember ever seeing a homosexual say at all, or less one saying, I had 500 men friends, and I got AIDS. Please send in money. It seemed like it always started with an old man or a woman or a child, and they roll in front of the camera and say, "Look, you can't get away from it. You can't get away from it on the farm. If you're up on a mountain, you're going to get it." But they never talk about the group that has the most AIDS cases. Why is that?
Well, because people don't give money to that group. They give money to old people and children. And women. That's unfortunately the bottom line. And you're absolutely right. The gay community is still ones with the highest incidence of AIDS. But that would not be a successful ad campaign. Mm-hmm. They, of course, are playing on everybody's fear and everybody's emotion. For example, they started in the early 1990s telling people that AIDS and HIV was going to spread throughout the heterosexual population. But the longest and largest study of its kind, called the Pavian study, proved that HIV is not transmitted heterosexually through sexual intercourse. This lady, and she's one of the AIDS establishment, she studied couples who would, one of them was HIV positive and one was HIV negative. And what she wanted to find out is how many times they would have to have sex before the HIV negative became HIV positive. That's called a seroconversion. Mm-hmm. And she studied these couples as long as 6 years. And, bottom line, Daniel, at the end of the study, not one single HIV negative member of the couple ever became HIV positive. HIV is not transmitted through heterosexual contact.
Mm. Well, that's true. I have a small child that several years ago, my teenagers, when they were a small child, they brought home a drawing. It was like 10 cartoons on a page, and the name of it was How You Can Get AIDS. And they were to color in these drawings, and they showed a child sitting there holding a sandwich, giving it to another child, and then they showed I don't know, a mosquito or something, but they were showing different things, and I thought, what in the world are they trying to do to tell a 5-year-old about how not to get AIDS? So what kind of brainwashing was that?
And none of it is supported by the scientific research. Absolutely none of it. This is what drives me crazy about this issue. These people make all kinds of pronouncements and proclamations and press releases and press conferences, and they say this and they say that, and there is not one stitch of evidence to prove anything that they're saying. Let me give you another quick example.
All right, sure, go ahead.
There are certain tests that anybody has to run when they think they've found something that's going to cause an infectious disease. There's 4 simple steps. They were written down over 100 years ago by Dr. Robert Koch, so he called them Koch's, or we call them Koch's postulates. The first one is very simple, makes common sense. He said that you have to find the thing you think causes the disease in every case of that disease. In other words, in every case of tuberculosis, you have to find the tuberculosis bacteria. In every case of smallpox, you have to find the smallpox virus. It's just common sense. But there are thousands and thousands of cases of AIDS on record where there's no HIV. Now, right there, we should stop and say something's wrong. But they don't. They just ignore that, and they go right about their business telling kids they're going to get AIDS by sharing sandwiches. Nobody's even suggesting that AIDS is spread by saliva anymore. Mm-hmm. There was a period of time when they made us afraid of kissing, too, but that's long gone because mm-hmm. there's no scientific evidence for it. What boggles my mind is the illogic and lack of reasoning. I'll give you another quick example.
Sure,
Just last month, the Centers for Disease Control announced 40,000 people every year are being newly infected with HIV. Now, you got to stop and listen to that for a second. 40,000 people are being newly infected every year with HIV. They can't say that, Daniel, because they don't have prior HIV negative tests on these people to know that they're newly infected. HIV has been proven to be an old virus. It didn't just start in the 1980s. It's an old virus. It is passed on from mother to child, which the AIDS establishment readily admits. So unless you have a test that says you're HIV negative, when you get a test that says you're HIV positive, you could have been positive all your life. I mean, we already know people who can live very healthy, very happy lives for 20, 30, 40 years with HIV or being HIV positive with no detrimental results.
Yeah.
So the CDC makes this pronouncement, and not one journalist, not one medical doctor, not one scientific researcher stood up and said, wait a minute, you can't prove that, so you can't say it. But they say it anyway.
What about Magic Johnson? What's his role in all this? Does he still have AIDS, and is he still going around the country trying to get money for AIDS? What's going on there?
He never had AIDS.
What did he have?
He was tested positive for HIV. There's a big difference. There's a lot of people. As a matter of fact, the CDC says there's 1 million people who test positive for HIV in this country. Very, very few of them have AIDS. And they're finally acknowledging something called a long-term non-progressor, which means that they're finally acknowledging that people live happy, healthy lives without drugs for a long, long time. Well, back to Magic Johnson. He was diagnosed HIV positive in November 1991. He tried taking the drug AZT for a couple of weeks. It made him so sick that he quit. As a matter of fact, the joke going around the NBA in December was, there's no magic in AZT, and there's no AZT in magic. And as a matter of fact, he played in the 1992 All-Star game and was the most valuable player of that game in February of 1992. So Magic stopped taking the drugs immediately, and he's never taken them since. He does natural therapies, and he's on the payroll of GlaxoSmithKline, the drug company that made AZT.
There you go.
So he doesn't say anything. But compare him to Arthur Ashe, for example. Arthur Ashe was diagnosed HIV positive. In the prime of his tennis career, he took AZT for 3.5 years and died from it. And the only reason he could go that long, because most people could only go 2 to 2.5 years on AZT before they died. But Arthur Ashe was in such great shape that he was able to go for a little over 3 years before it did him in as well.
Well, Stephen Davis, with all this misinformation about AIDS, what I'd really like to get to is what is your involvement in it? How did you get started in this research?
Well, first of all, Daniel, I have a background in government. I was an Arizona state senator, and I have a background in medicine. I was a physician's assistant. And so when Robert Gallo stood up in 1984 and just preemptively announced that HIV was the cause of AIDS, I thought something was fishy. But, it didn't touch me personally. I'm not gay. I'm not HIV positive. Until recently, I didn't know anybody who was gay or HIV positive. I've never lost a friend or a loved one to AIDS. So I didn't, like most people, I didn't do anything about it. I just thought, this doesn't sound right. And then in the early 1990s, they started making people afraid of having sex. Well, that pissed me off.
Okay.
So I started doing my own research. And then in 1996, Dr. Peter Duesberg wrote the definitive work on this. It's called Inventing the AIDS Virus. It's a very big, thick book, and it's scientific. I mean, anybody could read it, but it's still tough to understand. So I took Peter's book, and I kind of translated it into 3-letter words to make sure I understood it. And then I posted that on the Internet, and I called it AIDSgate. In AIDSgate, I recommended that people who had lost a loved one to AZT, and there were 300,000 of them by that time, should file a class action lawsuit against the drug company. It was called Burroughs Wellcome. It's now called GlaxoSmithKline, for the wrongful death of their loved one. And I thought I was finished with this issue, Daniel. I moved on, but 7 years later, I discovered there were a lot of lawsuits filed and won, but they were all private and they were all settled out of court, and with the stipulation that nothing ever be made public. So the public never got to hear sworn testimony about this. And so then I sat down and I wrote first a 2-part, 4-hour TV movie about it, and then I wrote my book, Wrongful Death, the AIDS Trial, about the class action suit that I wish had ever taken place. And all the testimony that would have occurred in that suit, all the scientific studies that would have backed up the fact that HIV does not cause AIDS, and so forth. So that's how I got back involved, and now, I don't know, I just call it righteous indignation, if you will. I am just, I talk to people every
You've had it
day.
with the lies, is basically what you're saying.
Yes.
And you want to get involved and start telling them the truth.
Exactly.
Right,
and,
I can respect that.
People call me every day who have been diagnosed HIV positive, and I hear their stories and what that diagnosis did to their life. I mean, just imagine it, if you can, being told you were HIV positive, and how what a disastrous effect that would have in your life. And even if you're not sick, you know what the diagnosis itself does. And I just my heart goes out to these people, and I just decided I was going to try to do everything I possibly could to tell the truth. And that's exactly right.
We have this question come in on the fastblastonedgeam.com website for you. It says, Stephen, my earliest memory of the AIDS announcement was that of a male flight attendant that was connected to the original case. This was back in the late 70s, and he was quoted as saying things like he was proud of giving other men gay cancer. They want to know, was that story relevant?
Well, originally, in the late 70s, there was something called GRID, or gay-related immune deficiency, as people were trying to figure out what this new, it was a new disease in a sense that we had known about immune deficiency in patients for a long, long time. Immune deficiency is caused by a lot of things, including giving drugs to transplant patients so their immune system doesn't reject a new organ and so forth. So we were very familiar with that, but in this particular case, we didn't know what was causing it, and we really didn't know what it was. And Kaposi's sarcoma was the hallmark symptom of AIDS in the early days, if you recall. These were brownish, bluish, purplish lesions and spots on the skin, mostly on the chest and arms and neck. And Kaposi's sarcoma was originally thought to be a cancer. It was later found out it is not a cancer. But yes, so in the early days, there were all kinds of speculation about what AIDS was, whether it was a cancer, what its causes were, and as I said, when the disease first started being looked at carefully in 1981, it was determined that it was an acquired immune deficiency syndrome, and as I said, at that time, everybody kind of knew that it was being caused by amyl nitrite, the poppers, the other drugs that were so rampant in the gay community.
Now, speaking of this question here, I seem to remember just when they were arguing about funding, before they started getting the billions of dollars in AIDS research funding and medication studies, that type of thing, that certain gay groups actually pronounced that they were wanting to infect the heterosexual community because they said unless they get infected, they're not going to get any funding. Now, of course, they could have been misled, as you say here, the root causes of AIDS, but in their mind, they've got to have a cure and they've got to get the public attention. So, I mean, have you ever, in your studies, come across any of the more outspoken groups that have suggested that they would infect the heterosexual community in order to gain funding and sympathy?
Well, there were a lot of threats going on at that time, and we're talking about 1982, 83. That was one of them. Because there wasn't any funding available. I mean, at that particular point, this was strictly a gay disease, and there wasn't very much funding for that subgroup of the American culture. And so the gays were trying to figure out how to get the funding to do something about this, because it was a very serious disease for them. And, there were groups doing this and that and saying this and that, and I'm not necessarily going to take them seriously. They were just trying to figure out how to get some money.
So the manufacturers of AZT, is injections the only delivery method that you know of? Is it possible that they could put that chemical or drug into food or water supplies?
Oh, well, first of all, AZT is only used in two drugs these days. They're Combivir and Trizavir, and it's not at the strength that it was being given for the years 87 to 97. We still don't know whether it's still killing people or not. And it's done by pill form. AZT has always been in pill form. Most antiretroviral drugs are given in pill form.
Yeah.
one of the biggest problems with it is some of the pills are so huge that it's hard for children to take. And boy, I've got to.
Well, Stephen, excuse me. I don't want you to miss the point of that question. Is it possible that the drug makers could, under the radar screen, contaminate or put this drug in food supplies without us knowing?
Anything's possible. I mean, yeah, sure. If you could take any drug and make it, put it in a liquid form and do anything with it.
Well, wouldn't it be advantageous to the makers if more people got AIDS that way?
Well, now I'm sorry. You're talking two different things. I thought you were talking about the drugs to cure it.
No. I was talking about the drugs to get people infected.
Well, okay. Let me get very specific with you here. You have to be talking about a drug that would create immune deficiency in a human being.
Right.
That is amyl nitrite, for example, is one of those drugs, and it is in liquid form. It comes. One of the reasons it's called poppers is it used to come in a little glass vial, and you pop the top off of it. It was for heart patients.
All right.
That's in liquid form. You could take that and you could put it in any water supply, and you could create immune deficiency in millions of people that way. Yes, to answer your question specifically.
Okay, yeah, that was what I was looking for. A lot of people have speculated that there's plans, of course, to decrease the human population, 1, to control certain segments of the population, 2, and to end the population, 3, I suppose. But in your studies, Stephen Davis, has anyone ever gave you a call with a sort of a threatening tone to it?
No, it's been amazing.
Okay.
They haven't done that. I mean, I've had good questions called in who don't agree with me, but that's nobody's been threatening. I think the worst, Daniel, is a lady doctor in North Carolina who accused me of advocating that people don't have safe sex, and I'm not even doing that at all. I'm simply saying that HIV is not something to be afraid of. HIV is proven not to cause AIDS. Mostly it's the drugs you take that kill you, and so there's no reason to have safe sex for HIV, but there are a lot of other reasons that people might want to have safe sex.
Well, Stephen, this might sound simplistic, but I thought you said earlier in the program that really what got you upset about this was somebody was trying to take your peace of mind away from sex and trying to make you think that every time you had sex you were going to get infected. And so really you were wanting peace of mind. You want somebody to get that dirt out of your mind, and you were going to fight it with some facts so you don't have to worry about it.
Exactly, Daniel.
Wow.
Having sex can be the most creative and spiritual and empowering thing that two human beings can do. So
you don't want a third party messing with that. You don't want people putting bad thoughts in your mind when I can see that. I can see
exactly.
That. Okay.
Exactly. Right. They take that away from us. They're taking a half hour away.
Dang it, man. That'd be bad. Hey, we got this for you, Stephen. Using the criteria of the late 80s for AIDS, has the rate of infection gone up, down, or stayed the same?
Okay. Well, again, we have to separate HIV from AIDS. I mean, not just me. Everybody has to. HIV is the virus that is supposed to cause AIDS. Now, AIDS is not something that you get infected with. AIDS is something you develop, according to the AIDS establishment, if you're infected with HIV. So let's repeat the question again, and we'll make it specific to HIV.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's fine. I was going to say, can you reword the question? Maybe you can answer their question by rewording yourself.
I think the question was about the rate of infection of HIV.
Right, exactly.
All right. The answer is that in 1984, the Centers for Disease Control started counting or estimating the number of people they thought in the United States who were infected with HIV. And in 1984, the number was 1 million. Today, it's 1 million. 10 years ago, it was 1 million. It has never, ever changed. Now, you name me in another infectious virus whose population has never changed in 22 years. It's another reason HIV, first of all, is not infectious, is not contagious, cannot be passed from one person to another, except in very special circumstances, and can't be the cause of AIDS because the AIDS cases have went up tremendously between 1984 and 1993, when they peaked at around 50,000 a year, and then it dropped back down. Meanwhile, people infected with HIV stayed the same. Does that make any sense, Daniel?
No, it really doesn't, because it seems that every other category of every kind of disease, the numbers are always going up. Of course, the numbers have to go up because, I mean, they have. I like the way you worded that. In Africa, you said they were just counting basically anybody who got sick and said you have AIDS, and so they have these outrageous numbers going on and saying whole cultures are being destroyed. But it sounds like that's just a political game playing by hacks to try to control the political atmosphere in those countries.
Absolutely, Daniel. In Africa, as I said, you don't have to be HIV positive to have AIDS. They do test some people, a very small number of people in Africa for HIV, and I'll tell you who those people are. They are women who have just given birth or are about to give birth. Now, pregnancy happens to be one of the things that will cause a false positive reading on an HIV test. So they're testing pregnant women, and they're getting pregnant women testing HIV, and they're then extrapolating that subgroup to the entire population.
Of course.
Well, it doesn't make any sense, but of course that's the only way they can get funding. The only way you can send money to Africa these days is through AIDS. It really is. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
And secondly, the drug companies want to be selling their drugs over there. It's a huge new market. When we forced AZT off the market, basically, here in 1997, they just started sending it to Africa. So that's what's going on over there.
Yeah. The other thing is things like ADD, attention deficit disorder, and there are drugs associated with it, like I think Ritalin or something. But now they have something called adult attention deficit disorder. They're looking for a whole new group to get on their drugs.
Oh yeah. I'm just amazed at. We have a new disease a day, it seems to me, and a new drug to cure it every day. Meanwhile, the drug companies just get richer and richer, and they make us more and more afraid. I mean, if you want to control a population, and I'm not telling you anything new, Daniel. If you want to control a population, make them afraid, and that's what's been happening now. And the AIDS case is simply one great example about that.
All right, everybody, we're listening to Stephen Davis, and we're talking about AIDS and HIV and the information going around it, which is swirling around, the misinformation. He's graciously agreed to come on the program. If you have a question for Stephen Davis, go to the edgeam.com website, click on the Fast Blast, it'll come right here to the studio. Stephen Davis, so you have a book there, and writing. Is it a single book you have, or have you written numbers of books on that subject?
No, the second one is almost finished. If I can find time to finish it. And the second one will deal specifically with the HIV tests and the HIV drugs.
How is those books, or the book you have now, how is that received in the gay community?
Most of them don't want to hear about it. They're not really open to the fact that this may all have been a very, very bad mistake to start believing that HIV caused AIDS, and it's a shame because there are a lot of gay men who are taking the drugs and they're getting very sick. As a matter of fact, there's a website. It's called Stay Positive or Stay Negative. Boy, I can't remember it now.
Sorry.
And it has pictures of gay men on there who have a disease called lipodystrophy, or actually a condition called lipodystrophy. It's when the fat of your face goes away and you develop a distended abdomen and lumps on your back and your neck.
Man.
And they have these pictures, and the caption is, HIV, not fun. Well, the problem is that lipodystrophy is not a symptom of HIV or AIDS. It's a side effect of the drugs. And so there's another example of just a flat-out lie and misinformation, because that website has to be called HIV Drugs Not Fun, or Not Fabulous, I think is the actual word. And so this is just another example of how they twist and turn this to keep this whole machine running.
So if the disease doesn't kill you, the drugs will.
Absolutely.
And you can quote me on that one next time you speak.
I will.
Say Daniel on the Ed Radio broadcast said that. This is really horrible what you're saying. I don't particularly agree with the gay lifestyle, but I certainly don't want to see anybody suffer, and for any reason. And so it just it seems to me there's been a fraud perpetrated on the public. But what about as you get older? It seems you're talking about drugs in general too. I want to bring that up because you always see an older person with 15 or 20 pills, and I'm thinking, how is it we came to that? Isn't it just they're usually getting one pill for something, and the 19 others are to offset the effects of that one?
That's right. Yeah. That's the game these days.
Mm-hmm.
Give somebody a pill, and then they're going to need the pills to counteract the side effects of the first pill, and then the pills to counteract the side effects of the second pill.
Right. Okay. What about health-wise? Is there any natural remedy that you know of for this?
Well, that's a really interesting question, Daniel, and I want to answer it very carefully. Yes, the answer is yes. There are lots of natural remedies. But the question is, remedy to what? HIV does not need a remedy because it is not a dangerous virus. It has been proven to be a harmless passenger virus. So nobody should feel like they have to go and treat HIV if they are HIV positive. However, immune deficiency syndrome is a real disease, and people are getting their immune systems decimated by a lot of things: the environment, pollution, drugs, food, stress. Stress is the biggest threat to a human being's immune system, and people can do something about that. Mm-hmm. And there are lots of natural remedies. There are immune system boosters and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Has anybody ever recovered from it that you know of?
From AIDS or HIV? Oh, absolutely. Most of them, as soon as they stop taking the drugs, they're fine. But also, if somebody had a serious immune deficiency, oh yeah, lots of people. Well, Magic Johnson, he developed immune deficiency from the AZT he was taking, and then look at him today. Mm-hmm. He's in great shape.
So, what is the symptom of immune deficiency? I mean, how is it that one would know they have it?
Well, you get diseases that normal people don't get. These are called opportunistic diseases, and they're called that because we carry the cause of that disease around with us, all of us, every day. And the only time they can cause a disease is when our immune system can't fight it. And so you get strange little diseases like it's called PCP. It's a special type of pneumonia, for example. And so people, when they have a disease that comes on that's a little strange, or that can't heal sores or something like that. In other words, when their body's immune system is not functioning to keep them in a normal, healthy state, then, they should look at doing something about their immune system. Now, I'm not a doctor. Let me preface this. I'm not a doctor.
Yeah, they'll get you on that. Uh-huh.
I'm not suggesting anybody do this or that. All I'm simply saying is there are lots of natural remedies out there available to help people bolster their immune system.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and now you've named a couple drug companies. What's the political connection to some of these, like SmithKline? Do they go back to the president or people on the Hill? I mean, where's the political connection to keep these people operating like that?
You remember a former the Secretary of Defense named Donald Rumsfeld?
Yeah.
He headed one of these drug companies. He headed a drug company, as a matter of fact, that was working on the bird flu vaccine. Mm-hmm. Did I give you any hint?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. Thank you for opening up that. What about this avian flu? Is that the next hoax that's coming around the pike?
Daniel, I honestly am not qualified to even comment on that. I have done all the research on AIDS and HIV, and not enough research on virtually anything else to speak intelligently or to give any comment.
So is it? Are you able to do speaking engagements, or do you just do radio? Or what's your reach out there with this message?
Well, frankly, I'll talk to anybody who wants to listen anytime, anywhere. Mm-hmm. For years and years and years, we were not allowed. When I say we, I'm talking about what is known as the dissent movement, those who don't believe that HIV causes AIDS. And by the way, this is not some fringe group. There's over 2,300 of the world's leading scientists and researchers and doctors and chiropractors and healthcare professionals who all agree with this, including two Nobel Prize winners in chemistry and medicine, members of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. I mean, this is a very well-respected group, and but for years we were not allowed to say anything. when I say not allowed, actually it started in 1987 when Dr. Peter Duesberg wrote his first paper, published, I believe, in Science magazine, that proved HIV could not cause AIDS. And there was a memo circulated around the Centers for Disease Control, and it simply said, we have to contain this guy. And the word contain is a quote.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a systematic, oh boy, am I going to use that word, conspiracy?
Oh boy.
If you will, to keep Dr. Peter Duesberg and anybody else off the air so that nobody could challenge the idea that HIV was the cause of AIDS. And that's gone on for 20 years. And not only it was a conspiracy to keep us off the air, but just last week, a friend of mine who wrote a paper about this was John Moore, who is the head of something, I don't know, about AIDS, some AIDS group. He called the dean of the college where my friend is a professor and tried to get him fired. So this is still going on, that they do not want our voices heard. And so it's that's why I say I'll talk to anybody, anytime, anywhere, because thanks to people like you, we're finally getting the chance to tell the truth and to get this truth out to more and more people. Mm-hmm. So through websites, through everything.
All right. Well, I think that's it, and that's the modicum, the tone of this show is discovering the truth together every Saturday night. What we do, and the more volume of information and the more people get involved with disseminating the truth, the more I think at one point there might be a power shift to the people demanding the truth on all subjects, because really, as you at very earliest, you just basically follow the money to the drug companies, and that's really where you can always find the culprit. Follow the money. So there's polling and pushing in every category, and so to get to truth is very hard because you've got all these self-interest groups, and the non-self-interest group are people like you and I and the listeners out there on the Edge Radio broadcast that are simply saying, what is the truth without your angle or your spin on it? You know, how much are, you know, what is the drug how much are the drug companies making? What political people are involved, and what's the connection with the homosexual community? And what's the connection to Africa and the UN? So you have all these things affecting what we know, and as a whole, the population is being controlled by the altering of the truth.
Absolutely, Dan. I couldn't agree with you more, and that's why I like to talk in terms of what are the scientific studies. What does the science say about this? Not what somebody pronounces from a press conference. And if people would have an access to the science, they would see this very clearly, and that's why there's lots of good different websites out there. I mentioned this group of 2,300, more than 2,300 professionals. You can find the list of those names and a lot of information, and their website is rethinkingaids.com. As I mentioned before, there's a website called helpforhiv.com, which goes through all the things that are wrong with the HIV test and why we're not correctly diagnosing anybody as HIV positive these days. There's a new video on YouTube by two-time Olympic gold medal winner Lee Evans. You can search for it with Lee Evans Speaks Out, and it's only a 5-minute video, but he goes through all the things that are wrong with the HIV test as well. Mm-hmm. There's my website is theaidstrial.com. You can see all kinds of scientific studies there. So I think that's the only way we're going to do this is to stop speculating about what's true and what's not, and read the science for itself.
Mm-hmm. We have this question here for you. When did Congress investigate Dr. Gallo, and what did he lie about?
1994. There was a congressional subcommittee. The head of it was Representative John Dingell, and he lied about everything. But most particularly, he lied about discovering the HIV virus, which he said he did at his press conference 10 years earlier, and it was later proven that he did not discover that virus. It was discovered by Dr. Luc Montagnier at the Pasteur Institute in France, and that's created a huge international incident that none less than President Ronald Reagan and then Prime Minister Jacques Chirac had to solve at the highest level. He lied about the patent application for the HIV test. You see what Robert Gallo did 2 hours before he announced HIV caused AIDS, he went and filed patent applications for the HIV test to diagnose HIV. And he made $1.7 million off of that over the next few years. And he lied on that patent application. As a matter of fact, the lady who processed that patent application said that she was so embarrassed because she would never have approved it had she known that he lied. So, and Gallo lied about finding HIV. Here's the insanity of this. Dr. Gallo announces HIV causes AIDS, but he then publishes a paper a month later saying he only found HIV in 36% of the AIDS cases he studied. Well, like I told you earlier, one of the requirements is that whatever you think causes a disease has to be found in every case of the disease. And then we find out he even lied about those 36%. So
Wow.
I don't think Gallo's ever told the truth about anything, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I don't think.
He stole other viruses. He stole cultures. The man is a thief and a liar and a megalomaniac.
What
and I
the
wish
heck?
to God he would sue me so I could get him into court and prove it.
Wow. Okay, well, Gallo, if you're listening, you heard it, so start the lawsuit. Here's a question for you. Dr. Stan Monteith has done an extensive study on the AIDS virus, and he says that in Africa, the people are contaminated through vaccines that the government has given them. Have you heard of Dr. Stan Monteith?
I have heard, and I've talked to Dr. Monteith, and, I've never been to Africa, so I can't argue with him. I know that there's a lot of shenanigans going on over there. First of all, they don't have clean water. They don't have enough to eat. They live in poverty conditions that are just horrendous. They're susceptible to all kinds of things because their immune systems are shot, because malnutrition and sleep deprivation are one of the two causes of immune deficiency. So there's all kinds of stuff, and they're being fed all these drugs and these vaccines. It's genocide. As a matter of fact, a case has been filed in the World Court charging the head of the South African commission that is giving people these antiretroviral drugs, charging him with genocide. That's going to be a very interesting case to watch.
Wow. That'll get the ball rolling. Let me ask you, doesn't it seem? I mean, when I see the push and pull of the Politburos and all those, when they're talking about the drugs and getting them from manufacturers or making them themselves and stealing the patent, doesn't it seem that in Africa that they'll round a village up, they'll give them an AIDS virus or a drug or an AZT or whatever, some kind of drug, but they're starving and said, no, I don't got food, but I got something to keep you from getting AIDS. I mean, what's that all about?
Well, that was President Mbeki's point from the beginning. When he took over as president, he said, don't send these drugs over here. Send us food. Send us ways to make clean water. Send us vitamins and minerals. And he proved by a lot of different studies in South Africa that when you give people basic vitamin and mineral supplements, they get better right away. They're not suffering from some virus-induced deadly disease. They're suffering from not having the basic necessities of life that the rest of us have. And, but of course, those things don't make money for drug companies.
Right.
So you have to tell a different story.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, if there was ever a judgment day and people have to go there and find out that, they're the cause of needless deaths and that, I'll tell you, I wouldn't know how those companies would answer. They have to think that there is no afterlife to answer to any of these type of things, because, boy, they'd have some talking to do then, wouldn't they?
I don't have any idea how these people sleep at night, Daniel. I just don't know.
Well, I'll tell you what, I really appreciate you coming out and talking about this. And obviously, you're not afraid to name names either, companies-wise or people-wise. But it just makes me mad that this kind of thing goes on, and it goes on, and the cover-ups go on. And at some point, whether this would be a good topic because we're talking about human life involved here, and we have other topics such as fluoride or whatever else, that there's manipulation of the people. It just seems that somebody needs to be held accountable for this, and I wish one of these issues that we deal with on this program, I'm sure other things that you listen to know about, that it's hard to pinpoint and get enough inertia to cause a shift to where somebody's held accountable. I don't know what's that going to take.
Well, that's a question I struggle with every day. What can I do to help make it happen? I think it is happening. At least I see the beginnings of it. There's a lot of energy right now around this issue to discover the truth. And just the fact that, you let me on your program here is evidence of that. And we are attracting more and more people to help them find the truth for themselves. And there's going to be some things. one of the things that has happened recently is that some of the states have passed laws saying that it's a crime for someone who is HIV positive to sleep with somebody else, basically. And they're putting people in jail for that. And it's not going to be too long before we're going to start winning those cases by showing this, by bringing forward the scientific evidence that proves, first of all, you don't even know whether that person is HIV positive because there's no test to determine that. And secondly, that it cannot be transmitted heterosexually. And we're going to start winning some of them. It took years, 10 years, 12 years, for the first cases to be won against the tobacco companies. So this is eventually going to happen. I frankly think it's going to happen in court, and that's why I wrote the wrongful death the AIDS trial, to give an example of how it could happen in court. And I think that's going to be appropriate because, people are very skeptical these days. They don't know who to believe, but I think that despite the OJ verdict, I still think people trust the court system. And when there's a court verdict that starts coming down and saying, wait a minute, no, the HIV tests are unreliable, the drugs are killing more people, blah, 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 that's when things are going to start shifting, just like they shifted with the cases against the tobacco industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have this comment here. It says that this show is another perfect example of government corruption, theft, pharmacies making billions through fake diseases, and even help causing the illness in which they must also fix. They also make this comment here, but isn't it also a way to wipe out part of the population? And that's something I mentioned earlier in the broadcast. People are going to die, and you mentioned in the bio on the Edge website 300,000 number, probably more than that. But isn't depopulation got to be some part of this matrix?
Well, the only answer I can give you to that is that I have not found any evidence in all of my research on this that shows that there was an intentional conspiracy to control the population through HIV. As I said, I do agree there's a conspiracy that started in 1987 to keep the truth from getting on the air, and to keep the people who were speaking the truth from basically continuing life. Dr. Duisberg lost all of his grants, for example, and anyway. Now, the result has been, obviously, that we've killed a lot of people. A lot of people. 300,000 is just the number of Americans we killed just with the drug AZT in the 10 years from 1987 to 1997. There have been hundreds of thousands more people die from this disaster, from this tragedy over the years. Yes, a lot of people are dying. Is it an out-and-out conspiracy for population control? I can't find evidence of that, Daniel, and I only like to say things that I can back up with evidential support. So I can't deny it. I'm not arguing with it. I am agreeing that that's been the effect. But I can't I can point my finger at Robert Gallo, and I can say he did this on this and this day, and this has been the result. But I can't point my finger at an individual or a group who intentionally have used this issue to control the population, and I don't have the memos to that or anything to that effect. So
okay,
that's the best answer I can give you.
Oh, well said there. Now, what specific drug companies are involved with this?
Well, all of them now. They're pretty much all of them are making some of the antiretroviral drugs. GlaxoSmithKline is the kingpin as far as I'm concerned, because they produced AZT in 1987 through 1997, which is the big killer in this country, killed, as I said, 300,000 people. They also make some of the new cocktails or protease inhibitors, but virtually all of the drug companies have come up with some drug now that they're calling their antiretroviral. See, HIV is not even really a virus; it's a retrovirus, and so these are called antiretroviral drugs, as if retroviruses needed to have anything combating them. None of them, and there's thousands of them, have never been proven to cause any harm in a human being. But we've got all these antiretroviral drugs now, and I'm sorry to have gone on and on. The simple answer is they're all involved. There's not a single one of them out there that's not making money off of this deal.
All right, Stephen Davis, in the final minute, you got the mic. Go ahead and say what you want to say.
Well, I would recommend people, first of all, go and look at the Lee Evans video. Go search YouTube for Lee Evans Speak Out. Go to some of these websites. Read some of the scientific studies and newspaper and magazine articles themselves. Educate themselves, because here's the thing. Right now, this issue may not touch you personally, but the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has recommended, and the American Medical Association has agreed, that everyone in the United States should be tested for HIV. So with all the false positives that are resulting from those tests, if it's not you, if it's not someone you love, if it's not a member of your family, it's going to be somebody you work with or somebody you know who's going to be tested and found diagnosed as HIV positive, and this issue then comes home. And now's the time to educate ourselves so that we can prevent disaster in the future.
No doubt about it. Stephen Davis, I'm going to have you back on the show. Would that be all right with you sometime?
I'd love it, Daniel. I really appreciate the opportunity.
All right, I appreciate you coming on tonight.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening.